Section 2 of Beacon Lights of History, Volume 1, The Old Pagan Civilizations, by John Lord. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Ancient Religions, Part 2. Of the other religions with which the Jews came in contact, and which more or less were in conflict with their own monotheistic belief, very little is definitely known, since their sacred books, if they had any, have not come down to us. Our knowledge is mostly confined to monuments, on which the names of their deities are inscribed, the animals which they worshipped, symbolic of the powers of nature, and the kings and priests who officiated in religious ceremonies. From these we learn or infer that among the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Phoenicians religion was polytheistic, but without so complicated or highly organized a system as prevailed in Egypt. Only about 20 deities are alluded to in the monumental records of either nation, and they are supposed to have represented the sun, the moon, the stars, and various other powers, to which were delegated by the unseen and occult supreme deity the oversight of this world. They presided over cities and the elements of nature, like the rain, the thunder, the winds, the air, the water. Some abode in heaven, some on the earth, and some in the waters under the earth. Of all these graven images existed, carved by men's hands, some in the form of animals, like the winged bulls of Nineveh. In the very earliest times, before history was written, it is supposed that the religion of all these nations was monotheistic, and that polytheism was a development as men became wicked and sensual. The knowledge of the one God was gradually lost, although an indefinite belief remained that there was a supreme power over all the other gods, at least a deity of higher rank than the gods of the people, who reigned over them as Lord of lords. This deity in Assyria was Ashur. He is recognized by most authorities as Ashur, a son of Shem and grandson of Noah, who was probably the hero and leader of one of the early migrations, and, as founder of the Assyrian Empire, gave it its name, his own being magnified and deified by his warlike descendants. Assyria was the oldest of the great empires occupying Mesopotamia, the vast plain watered by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, with adjacent countries to the north, west, and east. Its seat was in the northern portion of this region, while that of Babylonia, or Chaldea, its rival, was in the southern part. And although after many wars freed from the subjection of Assyria, the institutions of Babylonia, and especially its religion, were very much the same as those of the elder empire. In Babylonia the chief god was called El, or Il. In Babylon, although Babel, their tutelary god, was at the head of the pantheon, his form was not represented, nor had he any special temple for his worship. The Assyrian Ashur placed kings upon their thrones, protected their armies, and directed their expeditions. In speaking of him, it was Ashur, my lord. He was also called King of Kings, reigning supreme over the gods, and sometimes he was called the Father of the Gods. His position in the celestial hierarchy corresponds with the Zeus of the Greeks and with the Jupiter of the Romans. He was represented as a man with a horned cap, carrying a bow and issuing from a winged circle, which circle was the emblem of ubiquity and eternity. This emblem was also the accompaniment of Assyrian royalty. These Assyrian and Babylonian deities had a direct influence on the Jews in later centuries, because traders on the Tigris pushed their adventurous expeditions from the head of the Persian Gulf, either around the great peninsula of Arabia, or by land across the deserts, and settled in Canaan, calling themselves Phoenicians. And it was from the descendants of these enterprising but morally debased people that the children of Israel, returning from Egypt, received the most pertinacious influences of idolatrous corruption. In Phoenicia the chief city was also called Bel, or Baal, meaning Lord, the epithet of the one divine being who rules the world, the Lord of heaven. The deity of the Egyptian pantheon, with whom Baal most nearly corresponds, was Ammon, addressed as the supreme god. Ranking after El in Babylon, Ashur in Assyria, and Baal in Phoenicia, all shadows of the same supreme god, we notice among these Mesopotamians a triad of the great gods called Anu, Bel, and Hea. Anu, the primordial chaos; Hea, life and intelligence animating matter; and Bel, the organizing and creative spirit, or, as Rawlinson thinks, the original gods of the earth, the heavens, and the waters, corresponding in the main with the classical Pluto, Jupiter, and Neptune, who divided between them the dominion over the visible creation. The god Bel in the pantheon of the Babylonians and Assyrians is the god of gods and father of gods who made the earth and heaven. His title expresses dominion. In succession to the gods of this first trio, Anu, Bel, and Hea, was another trio named Seu, Shamash, and Vul, representing the moon, the sun, and the atmosphere. In Assyria and Babylon the moon god took precedence over the sun god, since night was more agreeable to the inhabitants of those hot countries than the day. Hence Seu was the more popular deity, but Shamash, the sun, as having most direct reference to a physical nature, the lord of fire, the ruler of the day, was the god of battles, going forth with the armies of the king triumphant over enemies. The worship of this deity was universal, and the kings regarded him as affording them especial help in war. Vul, the third of this trinity, was the god of the atmosphere, the god of tempests, the god who caused the flood which the Assyrian legends recognize. He corresponds with the Jupiter Tonans of the Romans, the prince of the power of the air, destroyer of crops, the scatterer of the harvest, represented with a flaming sword. But as god of the atmosphere, the giver of rain, of abundance, the lord of fecundity, he was beneficent as well as destructive. All these gods had wives resembling the goddesses in the Greek mythology, some beneficent, some cruel, rendering aid to men or pursuing them with their anger. And here one cannot resist the impression that the earliest forms of the Greek mythology were derived from the Babylonians and Phoenicians, and that the Greek poets, availing themselves of the legends respecting them, created the popular religion of Greece. It is a mooted question whether the Greek civilization is chiefly derived from Egypt or from Assyria and Phoenicia. Probably more from these old monarchies, combined, than from the original seat of the Aryan race east of the Caspian Sea. All these ancient monarchies had run out and were old when the Greeks began their settlements and conquests. There was still another and inferior class of deities among the Assyrians and Babylonians who were objects of worship, and were supposed to have great influence on human affairs. These deities were the planets under different names. The early study of astronomy among the dwellers on the plains of Babylon and in Mesopotamia gave an astral feature to their religion which was not prominent in Egypt. These astral deities were Nin, or Bar, the Saturn of the Romans, and Merodach, Jupiter, the august god, the eldest son of heaven, the lord of battles. This was the favorite god of Nebuchadnezzar, and epithets of the highest honor were conferred upon him, as king of heaven and earth, the lord of all beings, etc. Nergal, Mars, was a war god, his name signifying the great hero, the king of battles. He goes before kings in their military expeditions and lends them assistance in the chase. His emblem is the human-headed winged lion seen at the entrance of royal palaces. Ista, Venus, was the goddess of beauty, presiding over the loves of both men and animals, and was worshipped with unchaste rites. Nebo, Mercury, had the charge over learning and culture, the god of wisdom, who teaches and instructs. There were other deities in the Assyrian and Babylonian pantheon whom I need not name, since they played a comparatively unimportant part in human affairs, like the inferior deities of the Romans, presiding over dreams, over feasts, over marriages, and the like. The Phoenicians, like the Assyrians, had their goddesses. Ashtoreth, or Astarte, represented the great female productivity principle, as Baal did the male. It was originally a name for the energy of God, on a par with Baal. In one of her aspects she represented the moon, but more commonly she was the representative of the female principle in nature, and was connected more or less with voluptuous rites, the equivalent of Aphrodite or Venus. Tanith also was a noted female deity, and was worshipped at Carthage and Cyprus by the Phoenician settlers. The name is associated, according to Gesenius, with the Egyptian goddess Nut, and with the Grecian Artemis the huntress. An important thing to be observed of these various deities is that they do not uniformly represent the same power. Thus Baal, the Phoenician sun god, was made by the Greeks and Romans equivalent to Zeus or Jupiter, the god of thunder and storms. Apollo, the sun god of the Greeks, was not so powerful as Zeus, the god of the atmosphere, while in Assyria and Phoenicia the sun god was the greater deity. In Babylonia, Shamash was a sun god as well as Bel, and Bel again was the god of the heavens, like Zeus. While Zeus was the supreme deity in the Greek mythology, rather than Apollo the sun, it seems that on the whole the sun was the prominent and most commonly worshipped deity of all the Oriental nations, as being the most powerful force in nature. Behind the sun, however, there was supposed to be an indefinite creative power, whose form was not represented, worshipped in no particular temple by the esoteric few who were his votaries, and called the Father of all the gods, the Ancient of Days, reigning supreme over them all. This indefinite conception of the Jehovah of the Hebrews seems to me the last flickering light of the primitive revelation, shining in the souls of the most enlightened of the pagan worshippers, including perhaps the greatest of the monarchs, who were priests as well as kings. The most distinguishing feature in the worship of all the gods of antiquity, whether among Egyptians or Assyrians or Babylonians or Phoenicians or Greeks or Romans, is that of oblations and sacrifices. It was even a peculiarity of the old Jewish religion, as well as that of China and India. These oblations and sacrifices were sometimes offered to the deity, whatever his form or name, as an expiation for sin, of which the soul is conscious in all ages and countries. Sometimes to obtain divine favor, as in military expeditions, or to secure any object dearest to the heart, such as health, prosperity, or peace. Sometimes to propitiate the deity in order to avert the calamities following his supposed wrath or vengeance. The oblations were usually in the form of wine, honey, or the fruits of the earth, which were supposed to be necessary for the nourishment of the gods, especially in Greece. The sacrifices were generally of oxen, sheep, and goats, the most valued and precious of human property in primitive times, for those old heathen never offered to their deities that which cost them nothing, but rather that which was dearest to them. Sometimes, especially in Phoenicia, human beings were offered in sacrifice, the most repulsive peculiarity of polytheism. But the instincts of humanity generally kept men from rites so revolting. Christianity, as one of its distinguishing features, abolished all forms of outward sacrifice as superstitious and useless. The sacrifices pleasing to God are a broken spirit, as revealed to David and Isaiah amid all the ceremonies and ritualism of Jewish worship, and still more to Paul and Peter when the new dispensation was fully declared. The only sacrifice which Christ enjoined was self-sacrifice, supreme devotion to a spiritual and unseen and supreme God and to his children, as the Christ took upon himself the form of a man, suffering evil all his days, and finally even an ignominious death, in obedience to his Father's will, that the world might be saved by his own self-sacrifice. With sacrifices as an essential feature of all the ancient religions, if we except that of Persia in the time of Zoroaster, there was need of an officiating priesthood. The priests in all countries sought to gain power and influence, and made themselves an exclusive caste, more or less powerful as circumstances favored their usurpations. The priestly caste became a terrible power in Egypt and India, where the people, it would seem, were most susceptible to religious impressions, were most docile and most ignorant, and had in constant view the future welfare of their souls. In China, where there was scarcely any religion at all, this priestly power was unknown, and it was especially weak among the Greeks, who had no fear of the future, and who worshipped beauty and grace rather than a spiritual God. Sacerdotalism entered into Christianity when it became corrupted by the lust of dominion and power, and with great force ruled the Christian world in times of ignorance and superstition. It is sad to think that the decline of sacerdotalism is associated with the growth of infidelity and religious indifference, showing how few worship God in spirit and in truth even in Christian countries. Yet even that reaction is humanly natural, and as it so surely follows upon epochs of priestcraft, it may be a part of the divine process of arousing men to the evils of superstition. Among all nations where polytheism prevailed, idolatry became a natural sequence, that is, the worship of animals and of graven images, first as symbols of the deities that were worshipped, generally the sun, moon, and stars, and the elements of nature, like fire, water, and air. But the symbols of divine power, as degeneracy increased and ignorance set in, were in succession worshipped as deities, as in India and Africa at the present day. This is the lowest form of religion and the most repulsive and degraded which has prevailed in the world, showing the enormous difference between the primitive faiths and the worship which succeeded, growing more and more hideous with the progress of ages, until the fullness of time arrived when God sent reformers among the debased people, more or less supernaturally inspired, to declare a new truth, and even to revive the knowledge of the old in danger of being utterly lost. It is a pleasant thing to remember that the religions thus far treated, as known to the Jews, and by which they were more or less contaminated, have all passed away with the fall of empires and the spread of divine truth, and they can never again be revived in the cities where they nourished. Mohammedanism, a monotheistic religion, has taken their place, and driven the ancient idols to the moles and the bats; and where Mohammedanism has failed to extirpate ancient idolatries, Christianity in some form has come in and dethroned them forever. There was one form of religion with which the Jews came in contact which was comparatively pure, and this was the religion of Persia, the loftiest form of all pagan beliefs. The Persians were an important branch of the Iranian family. The Iranians were the dominant race throughout the entire tract lying between the Sulayman Mountains and the Pamir steppe on the one hand, and the great Mesopotamian valley on the other. It was a region of great extremes of temperature, the summers being hot and the winters piercingly cold. A great part of this region is an arid and frightful desert, but the more favored portions are extremely fertile. In this country the Iranians settled at a very early period, probably 2500 B.C., about the time the Hindus immigrated from Central Asia to the banks of the Indus. Both Iranians and Hindus belonged to the great Aryan or Indo-European race, whose original settlements were on the high tablelands northeast of Samarkand, in the modern Bokhara, watered by the Oxus or Ammon River. From these rugged regions east of the Caspian Sea, where the means of subsistence are difficult to be obtained, the Aryans immigrated to India on the southeast, to Iran on the southwest, to Europe on the west, all speaking substantially the same language. Of those who settled in Iran, the Persians were the most prominent, a brave, hardy, and adventurous people, warlike in their habits, immoral in their conduct. They were a pastoral rather than a nomadic people, and gloried in their horses and cattle. They had great skill as archers and horsemen, and furnished the best cavalry among the ancients. They lived in fixed habitations, and their houses had windows and fireplaces. But they were doomed to a perpetual struggle with a severe and uncertain climate, and a soil which required ceaseless diligence. The whole plateau of Iran, says Johnson, was suggestive of the war of elements, a country of great contrasts of fertility and desolation, snowy ranges of mountains, salt deserts, and fields of beauty lying in close proximity. The early Persians are represented as having oval faces, raised features, well-arched eyebrows, and large dark eyes, now soft as the gazelle's, now flashing with quick insight. Such people were extremely receptive of modes and fashions, the aptest learners as well as the boldest adventurers, not patient in study, nor skilful to invent, but swift to seize and appropriate, terrible breakers up of old religious spells. They dissolved the old material civilization of Cushite and Turanian origin. What passion for vast conquests! These rugged tribes, devoted to their chiefs, led by Cyrus from their herds and hunting grounds to startle the pampered Lydians with their spare diet and clothing of skins, living on what they could get, strangers to wine and wassail, schooled in manly exercises, cleanly even to superstition, loyal to age and filial duties, with a manly pride of personal independence that held a debt the next worst thing to a lie, their fondness for social graces, their feudal dignities, their chiefs giving counsel to the king even while submissive to his person, esteeming prowess before praying, their strong ambition, scorning those who scorned toil. Artaxerxes wore upon his person the worth of 12,000 talents, yet shared the hardships of his army in the march, carrying quiver and shield, leading the way to the steepest places, and stimulating the hearts of his soldiers by walking 25 miles a day. There was much that is interesting about the ancient Persians. All the old authorities, especially Herodotus, testify to the comparative purity of their lives, to their love of truth, to their heroism in war, to the simplicity of their habits, to their industry and thrift in battling sterility of soil and the elements of nature, to their love of agricultural pursuits, to kindness towards women and slaves, and above all other things to a strong personality of character which implied a powerful will. The early Persians chose the bravest and most capable of their nobles for kings, and these kings were mild and merciful. Xenophon makes Cyrus the ideal of a king, the incarnation of sweetness and light, conducting war with a magnanimity unknown to the ancient nations, dismissing prisoners, forgiving foes, freeing slaves, and winning all hearts by a true nobility of nature. He was a reformer of barbarous methods of war, and as pure in morals as he was powerful in war. In short, he had all those qualities which we admire in the chivalric heroes of the Middle Ages. There was developed among this primitive and virtuous people a religion essentially different from that of Assyria and Egypt, with which is associated the name of Zoroaster or Zarathustra. Who this extraordinary personage was, and when he lived, it is not easy to determine. Some suppose that he did not live at all. It is most probable that he lived in Bactria from 1000 to 1500 B.C., but all about him is involved in hopeless obscurity. The Zendavesta, or the sacred books of the Persians, are mostly hymns, prayers, and invocations addressed to various deities, among whom Ormazd was regarded as supreme. These poems were first made known to European scholars by Anquetil de Perron, an enthusiastic traveller, a little more than 100 years ago, and before the laws of Menu were translated by Sir William Jones. What we know about the religion of Persia is chiefly derived from the Zend Avesta. Zend is the interpretation of the Avesta. The oldest part of these poems is called the Gathas, supposed to have been composed by Zoroaster about the time of Moses. As all information about Zoroaster is personally unsatisfactory, I proceed to speak of the religion which he is supposed to have given to the Iranians, according to Dr. Martin Hogg, the great authority of this subject. Its peculiar feature was dualism, two original uncreated principles, one good, the other evil. Both principles were real persons, possessed of will, intelligence, power, consciousness, engaged from all eternity in a perpetual contest. The good power was called Ahura Mazda, and the evil power was called Angro Mainus. Ahura Mazda means the much-knowing spirit, or the all-wise, the all-bountiful, who stood at the head of all that is beneficent in the universe, the creator of life, who made the celestial bodies and the earth, and from whom came all good to man and everlasting happiness. Angro Mainus means the black or dark intelligence, the creator of all that is evil, both moral and physical. He had power to blast the earth with barrenness, to produce earthquakes and storms, to inflict disease and death, destroy flocks and the fruits of the earth, excite wars and tumults, in short, to send every form of evil on mankind. Ahura Mazda had no control over this power of evil; all he could do was to baffle him. These two deities who divided the universe between them had each subordinate spirits or genii who did their will, and assisted in the government of the universe, corresponding to our idea of angels and demons. Neither of these supreme deities was represented by the early Iranians under material forms, but in process of time corruption set in, and Magism, or the worship of the elements of nature, became general. The elements which were worshipped were fire, air, earth, and water. Personal gods, temples, shrines, and images were rejected. But the most common form of worship was that of fire, in Mithra, the genius of light, early identified with the sun. Hence, practically, the supreme god of the Persians was the same that was worshipped in Assyria and Egypt and India, the sun, under various names, with this difference, that in Persia there were no temples erected to him, nor were there graven images of him. With the sun was associated a supreme power that presided over the universe, benignant and eternal. Fire itself, in its pure universality, was more to the Iranians than any form. From the sun, says the Avesta, are all things sought that can be desired. To fire the Persian kings addressed their prayers. Fire, or the sun, was in early times a symbol of the supreme power rather than the power itself, since the sun was created by Ahura Mazda, Ormazd. It was to him that Zoroaster addressed his prayers, as recorded in the Gathas. "I worship," said he, "the creator of all things, Ahura Mazda, full of light. Teach thou me, Ahura Mazda, out of thyself, from heaven by thy mouth, whereby the world first arose." Again, from the Korda Avesta we read, "In the name of God, the giver, forgiver, rich in love, praise be to the name of Ormazd, who always was, always is, and always will be, and from whom alone is derived rule." From these and other passages we infer that the religion of the Iranians was monotheistic. And yet the sun was also worshipped under the name of Mithra. Says Zoroaster, "I invoke Mithra, the lofty, the immortal, the pure, the sun, the ruler, the eye of Ormazd." It would seem from this that the sun was identified with the Supreme Being. There was no other power than the sun which was worshipped. There was no multitude of gods, nothing like polytheism, such as existed in Egypt. The Iranians believed in one supreme eternal God who created all things, beneficent and all wise, yet the supreme power was worshipped under the symbol of the sun, although the sun was created by him. This confounding the sun with his supreme and intelligent being makes the Iranian religion indefinite, and hard to be comprehended, but compared with the polytheism of Egypt and Babylon, it is much higher and purer. We see in it no degrading rites, no offensive sacerdotalism, no caste, no worship of animals or images; all is spiritual and elevated, but little inferior to the religion of the Hebrews. In the Zend Avesta we find no doctrines, but we do find prayers and praises and supplication to a supreme being. In the Vedas, the Hindu books, the powers of nature are gods; in the Avesta they are spirits, or servants of the Supreme. The main difference between the Vedic and Avestan religions is that in the latter the Vedic worship of natural powers and phenomena is superseded by a more ethical and personal interest. Ahura Mazda, Ormazd, the living wisdom, replaces Indra, the lightning god. In Iran there grew up what India never saw, a consciousness of world purpose, ethical and spiritual, a reference of the idea to the future rather than the present, a promise of progress, and the idea that the law of the universe means final deliverance of good from evil, and its eternal triumph. The loftiness which modern scholars like Hogg, Lenormant, and Spiegel see in the Zend-Avesta pertains more directly to the earlier portions of these sacred writings attributable to Zoroaster, called the Gathas. But in the course of time Avesta was subjected to many additions and interpretations, called the Zend, which show degeneracy. A world of myth and legend is crowded into liturgical fragments. The old Bactrian tongue in which the Avesta was composed became practically a dead language. There entered into the Avesta old Chaldean traditions. It would be strange if the pure faith of Zoroaster should not be corrupted after Persia had conquered Babylon, and even after its alliance with Media, where the Magi had a great reputation for knowledge. And yet, even with the corrupting influence of the superstitions of Babylon, to say nothing of Media, the Persian conquerors did not wholly forget the God of their fathers in their old Bactrian home. And it is probable that one reason why Cyrus and Darius treated the Jews with so much kindness and generosity was the sympathy they felt for the monotheism of the Jewish religion in contrast with the polytheism and idolatry of the conquered Babylonians. It is not unreasonable to suppose that both the Persians and Jews worshipped substantially the one God who made the heaven and the earth, notwithstanding the dualism which entered into the Persian religion, and the symbolic worship of fire which is the most powerful agent in nature. And it is considered by many that from the Persians the Jews received, during their captivity, their ideas concerning a personal devil, or power of evil, of which no hint appears in the law or the earlier prophets. It would certainly seem to be due to that monotheism which modern scholars see behind the dualism of Persia, as an elemental principle of the old religion of Iran, that the Persians were the noblest people of pagan antiquity, and practiced the highest morality known in the ancient world. Virtue and heroism went hand in hand, and both virtue and heroism were the result of their religion. But when the Persians became intoxicated with the wealth and power they acquired on the fall of Babylon, then their degeneracy was rapid, and their faith became obscured. Had it been the will of Providence that the Greeks should have contended with the Persians under the leadership of Cyrus, the greatest Oriental conqueror known in history, rather than under Xerxes, then even an Alexander might have been baffled. The great mistake of the Persian monarchs in their degeneracy was in trusting to the magnitude of their armies rather than in their ancient discipline and national heroism. The consequence was a panic which would not have taken place under Cyrus whenever they met the Greeks in battle. It was a panic which dispersed the Persian hosts into the final battle of Arbela, and made Alexander the master of Western Asia. But degenerate as the Persians became, they rallied under succeeding dynasties, and in Artaxerxes II and Chosroes the Romans found, in their declining glories, their most formidable enemies. Though the brightness of the old religion of Zoroaster ceased to shine after the Persian conquests, and religious rites fell into the hands of the Magi, yet it is the only Oriental religion which entered into Christianity after its magnificent triumph, unless we trace early monasticism to the priests of India. Christianity had a hard battle with Gnosticism and Manichaeism, both of Persian origin, and did not come out unscathed. No Grecian system of philosophy, except Platonism, entered into the Christian system so influential as the disastrous Manichaean heresy, which Augustine combated. The splendid mythology of the Greeks, as well as the degrading polytheism of Egypt, Assyria, and Phoenicia, passed away before the power of the cross. But Persian speculations remained. Even Origen, the greatest scholar of Christian antiquity, was tainted with them. And the mighty myths of the origin of evil, which perplexed Zoroaster, still remain unsolved. But the belief of the final triumph of good over evil is common to both Christians and the disciples of the Bactrian sage. Authorities: Rawlinson's Egypt and Babylon, History of Babylonia, by A.H. Sayce; Smith's Dictionary of the Bible; Rawlinson's Herodotus; George Smith's History of Babylonia; Lenormant's Manuel de Histoire Ancienne; Layard's Nineveh and Babylon; Journal of Royal Asiatic History; Heren's Asiatic Nations; Dr. Pusey's Lectures on Daniel; Birch's Egypt from the Earliest Times; Brooke's History of Egypt, Records of the Past; Rawlinson's History of Ancient Egypt; Wilkinson's Ancient Egyptians; Sayce's Ancient Empires of the East; Rawlinson's Religion of the Ancient World; James Freeman Clarke's 10 Great Religions; Religion of Ancient Egypt, by P. Lepage Renouf; Moffat's Comparative History of Religions; Bunson's Egypt's Place in History; Persia from the Earliest Period, by W.S.W. Vaux; Johnson's Oriental Religions; Hogg's Essays; Spiegel's Avesta. The above are the more prominent authorities, but the number of books on ancient religions is very large. Section 3